The volume is NG. Hold on 1 second. Let's see what we can do. Volume. L'chaim. Hold on. Mute. Put it back on. How's the volume now?
Still a low.
Still low.
I hear it. Everyone hears it? Oh, maybe it's me then.
It's not you, it's me.
I'm sorry. It's fine. It's fine. It was my thing.
Okay, pull it close.
L'chaim, Morty, can you hear the Rabbi Morty?
He's not saying anything, so you shouldn't be hearing him.
Okay. And okay, 1 sec. Backgrounds and effects. Turn off the blur. Wait a second, I can't see you. Hold on 1 second. Hi. Hi, I love you. Thank you for coming to my Gemara class.
Are you at home?
I am at home. Remember when you came to my house?
Where's Rivka?
Where's Rivka?
Rivka's downstairs coloring. You have to come here if you want to say hi to Rivka.
Is that Jaime? I can't see.
Yeah.
I want to go see Rivka on the phone.
Okay, tell your parents that you could come whenever you want, okay? You're always welcome. Boost. Bye, sweetheart. L'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol niyeh baro.
Amen.
Okay, let's begin. So,
Another night, my love.
okay. So the last thing we did was we talked about the 5 different things that Rava taught us regarding the concept of Tashmishe Kedusha versus Tashmishe Mitzvah. And in a few of those instances, what Rava taught us was that even though at first glance some things might seem to be Tashmishe Mitzvah because they are, or Tashmishe de Tashmishe. Oh, sorry, all the Gemaras are over there. Sorry, I apologize. You see them right there in the window? Careful, don't light on fire. Okay. So, what's it called? So, even though, like as an example, he mentioned a situation where he thought that the bima was tashmishe, the tashmishe, because the Torah was placed on a covering on top of the bima, and therefore it's 2 steps removed from the bima. But then he saw that they actually sometimes put the Torah on the bima itself. Same thing with the curtain inside the parochet. Sometimes they would fold it underneath and then they would put it on top of the actual curtain. So in each case, he rendered those cases as tashmishe kedusha, and therefore they could not be used or thrown away or not put in a safe place, not had ginizah done to them. So we're picking up from there on Daf Chaf Vav Amud Bet 26b3. The Gemara says as follows. So we talked about putting things in a safe place. We talked about getting rid of them. And now the Gemara is going to deal with that question. Ama Marzutra taught, mitpechot sefarim shebalu. So mitpachot we talked about, we already had is like the wrappings or the cloth, okay? So if you have the wrapping of sefarim, which does not mean a sefer Torah, it means any of the other 24 books of the Torah, any of the 24 books, but not a Sefer Torah. So mitpachot sefarim shebalu, that they became worn out, now they have a hole in them. Osin otam tachrichim lemet mitzvah. You're allowed to use them, listen to this, fascinating, for shrouds, for the clothing, the dressing of a person who died, who has no one to bury him. So the Mishnah specifically says, lemet mitzvah. It does not say that you could use it as a shroud for any met, for anyone that passes away, but specifically met mitzvah. Okay?
Seemingly a higher order shroud.
A higher order kedusha, yes. Why? Because A met mitzvah is one of the highest forms of chesed. Even a Kohen Gadol that can't become tameh to his own family members, if he sees a corpse on the side of the road that's not been buried, that's met mitzvah. Now, it used to be that was a very relatively rare occurrence. Unfortunately, in the last 60 days, it has not been such a rare occurrence. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should be zocheh to see nikmat dam avadecha shafuch, and a peaceful end to all of this with the return of the hostages, the health of our soldiers, and the safety and security of Eretz Israel. Says the Gemara, so when you wrap the met mitzvah in it, v'zuhi ginizatan, and that becomes their actual burial. Now, that's an interesting thing that the Gemara seems to be putting forward, because we already learned that these things, tashmishei kedusha, what do they require? Ginizah. That means that just as is, just burying them in the ground, that would be ginizah. Now the Gemara says, so what do you do with it? You wrap a met mitzvah in it. No one told us before that you need anything more than ginizah. So why are we adding in now this higher level of being buried in a met mitzvah? All right? So the answer is that, and this is just an interesting concept, we relate usually to met mitzvah as something that has no recourse. So therefore, it's a big mitzvah for you to get involved. But most of the time when we think about met mitzvah, how do we think about it? We think about it like the Kohen Gadol came across it. It's a big mitzvah for him to bury the body. Any a regular case of someone passes away, they have relatives, someone has that responsibility. So that responsibility falls to their family members, okay? Met mitzvah, who is the mitzvah to bury a met mitzvah? It's a mitzvah on the tzibur. If there isn't one, so who gets the mitzvah? The whoever's there. But since the mitzvah primarily belongs to the community, so when you have the mitpachot sefarim shebalu, which also belong to the community, that is a good parallel to be able to use the objects of the sefarim. Now, it's interesting to notice because that correlation, which is brought down in the Rishonim, is only a good parallel if the mitpachot that we're talking about are mitpachot of a sefer that belongs to the community. What if you have mitpachot that belong to a private individual? There would be no parallel, right, to a public obligation being done with something that belongs to the public.
Unless you argue that the Torah belongs to all Jews.
Okay, but again, that I wouldn't say necessarily that would be something that would hold over into the mitpachot as well. You know?
Yeah, but once it's no longer serving a purpose, it belongs to the communal. It's going into general disposition. So
once what?
Meaning the cover is no longer serving its purpose of covering because
Right.
It's been damaged.
Okay.
So it's going to be thrown away in a respectful way. So you're giving it one more opportunity for a mitzvah.
So there's no question that we're saying that what we're saying here is an ideal situation because it's a mitzvah. I'm just saying that the opinions that draw the parallel of public to public, that would only be relevant by a public mitpachat, not necessarily one that belonged to a person privately. So according to that opinion, there would not be this idea of using it for a mitzvah.
Once that private person lets go of something,
It's still not private. It's still not public property. It's his, just buried. Yeah. Okay. Says the Gemara. V'amarava sefer Torah shebala. Now we're going up a level. What about if it's not the wrapping that got worn out, but rather the sefer Torah itself? So we're not talking about where it's old. We're not talking about where it's worn out. We're talking about where it's worn out to the point where it's pasul. Okay? In such a case, gonzin oto etzel talmid chacham. They bury it next to a Torah scholar. So let's say you have a big talmid chacham passes away. Not only do they bury him with an old sefer Torah that's worn out as well, which also has a beautiful symmetry and poetry to it. Va'afilu shoneh halachot. What if the person is not a talmid chacham, but there's someone who is shoneh halachot? He learned halachot. What's the Gemara trying to say over here? Not someone who went down into the depths of understanding each halakha and the logic and why it works. but even a more simple element of Shoneh Halachot. Interesting that line, Shoneh Halachot, because we say it every morning. What do we say? Kol HaShoneh Halachot B'chol Yom. I say it every morning before the halacha. Anyone who recites Shoneh Halachot or learns Halachot B'chol Yom, Muftach Lo Shu Ben Olam Haba. And what do? We then just say a halacha. We're not sitting there opening up the books, learning the opinions, seeing which one is right, the understanding. It's just straightforward. This is the halakha, this is how many candles, this is the way you light it. Even somebody like that, Shoneh Halachot, is worthy of having the Torah buried with him. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says,
Sefer Torah is worthy of being buried with him.
Whichever way you want to say it. Yeah, I would say it the other way. I would say that an expert Talmid Chacham outweighs the Torah, because he has what's in it plus. But a inferior Sefer Torah, an inferior student of Torah, has the Torah in him, but the Torah would be higher than him because there's more in it that he did not learn. Okay? So I would say that would be dependent. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Ubekli cheres, not only do we bury it in that, along with a Talmid Chacham or a Shoneh Halachot, but we bury it in a Kli cheres. Why? Because that also kind of protects the Sefer Torah even when it's buried. When it talks about saving a document, specifically the document that we're saving over there, fascinating actually to think about this document. The pasuk says, "Ko amar Hashem tzivakot, Elohei Yisrael." So says Hashem of hosts. Look at the inside, the verse there. God of Yisrael, to take these books. Et Sefer HaMikneh Hazeh, this book of acquisition. Ve'et HaChatum, Ve'et Sefer HaGalui Hazeh, U'natatem beKli cheres ma'an yamdu yamim rabim. Put them in earthenware vessels in order they should last for a long time. What document does the pasuk over here want to preserve and protect? It's the document that Yirmiyah, his student Baruch ben Neriah, after Jeremiah talks about the Jewish people being driven into Chutz La'aretz, Baruch ben Neriah is commanded to go buy a piece of property in Israel and sign it with witnesses. Everyone's leaving. You can imagine, fire sale, he got it for very cheap. But the point is, not that he was trying to find the bargain, but that God was sending a message, Shov Nashuv, you're going to return to this place. So in order that this document should survive the ravages of time and exist as something that imbues hope in the Jewish people that will go back again to Eretz Yisrael, so God says, put this in a earthenware vessel, and that way it will be protected. So what do you see from that? That an earthenware vessel protects documents even when they're buried from erosion, in which case, that's the halacha also with regards to a Sefer Torah. Now, the Mishnah continues. Okay, so we talked about ma'alim bakodesh velo moridim, and we mentioned the hierarchy of how that works. So Bet Knesset, Teva, Parochet, Sefarim, etc., etc. Ve'amar Rav Papi mishmeh derava. Rav Papa said in the name of Rav, Beknishta leber Rabbanan. If a person wants to take, okay, a Bet Knesset, Beknishta, so a synagogue, and you want to turn it in Leber Rabbanan, into a house of the rabbis, what does that mean? It means a place of Talmud Torah, a Bet Midrash. Shari, you're allowed. Leber Rabbanan de Beknishta. If you want to take it from a Bet Midrash to a Bet Knesset, Asur, it's forbidden. What is he telling you, Rav Papi?
Studying is more
That a study hall, a Bet Midrash, is holier than a synagogue. Gemara says, Rav Papa Mishmeh de Rava. So that was Rav Papi. This is Rav Papa. Mishmeh de Rava, said the name of Rabbi, Matni Ipcha. He learned exactly the opposite. That you could take a Bet Midrash and turn it into a Bet Knesset, but you can't take a Bet Knesset and turn it into a Bet Midrash. Why? Because he holds that a Bet Knesset is holier than a Bet Midrash. Now, Gemara says, okay, so what do we do with this? Amar Rav Acha teaches, Kavate de Rav Papi mistabra. It makes more sense to follow the opinion of Rav Papi that says that a Bet Midrash is holier than a Bet Knesset. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Bet Knesset mutar lasoto Bet Midrash. Bet Knesset you're allowed to turn into a Bet Midrash. Shema Minah, so you see that we're quoted from the fact that we're quoting Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who was an Amorah, but is a much earlier Amorah than Rav Papi. You see from there that a Bet Knesset is of a lower stature and a Bet Midrash is of a higher stature. Okay, now the Gemara says, Darash bar Kapra, Rav Kapra learned, what does it say? V'yisrof et bet Hashem ve'et bet HaMelech ve'et kol batei Yerushalayim, and he burned the house of God and the house of the king and all the houses of Jerusalem. Ve'et kol bayit gadol sarav b'esh, and every big house did he burn. Now, who are we talking about over here? Let's take a look in the pasuk on the side. Vayisrof. We're talking about over here in Melachim Bet. Vayisrof et bet Hashem ve'et bet HaMelech. He burnt all the house of Hashem, the house of the king, the houses of Jerusalem, and every great house. Who are we talking about over here? We're talking about the emissary, the butcher of Nebuchadnezzar, who was known as Nebuzaradan. He was his general. We have some terrible stories with Nebuzaradan. But he comes into this place and he burns everything. Now Bar Kapra learns on this pasuk, what are all these descriptions of these different homes in the Jerusalem area? Bet Hashem is Bet HaMikdash. House of Hashem, that's the Bet HaMikdash. Bet HaMelech, what does it mean? The king's house. Elu Palterin Shel Melech. That refers to the actual palace of the present king at the time that he was destroying the Bet HaMikdash.
Not the outskirts of the temple?
No.
So it's not the heavenly king, it's the earthly king.
So we described first Bet Hashem, the Bet HaMikdash. He destroyed, he burnt. Now he set on fire the house of the king. Ve'et kol batei Yerushalayim, the house of Jerusalem. What does that mean? That means actually the houses of all the people. Ve'et kol bet gadol sarav, and every big house that he burned. What does it mean? If you just told me that he burnt all the houses, you're now telling me he built the big house, he burnt the big houses. Included in all the houses is the big houses. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, each one explains the words of Bar Kapra in a different way. One of them says, what does it mean, Bayit Gadol? A place where Migadlim bo Torah. They expand and they expound on the words of Torah. One says, Makom she'migadlim bo tefillah. What the place where they have and they expand on prayers. In each place we ascribe the word gadol to the fact that you're doing something to a great level. Either a bet knesset where they did many tefillot, or a bet midrash where they studied a lot of Torah. Now, I was thinking to myself, what is the language then of migadlim? Yeah, what is the language of migadlim? They, on Torah it's quite easy. Why? Because you have Torah, and remember, at this point in time, you don't have the Gemara being written. You don't even have the Mishnah. So all you have is the five books of the Torah, and whichever books have been written thus far in Nach. Everything in the written,
Plus the oral transmission, not books.
not written.
Right.
That means that everything that's written is Torah shebichtav. Where do they take Megadlin Torah? Means they took the words of Torah and they made it bigger. Was when you brought the oral tradition to the written tradition. What are you doing? You're expanding the Torah. So what does it mean, Megadlin? That expression, how do you explain it when it comes to tefillah? How are we making tefillah bigger when we come to the Beit Knesset?
Two ways.
Go ahead.
One, get more people to show up.
Okay.
And number two, hire a more...
So wait a minute, let's
Chazan.
plug that back in. Megadlim bo tefillah means that we're growing tefillah because more people are engaged in it, which means that there are more prayers. That's what you're saying. Yeah? Okay. The second reason is you're saying it's longer because you have a
Not
chazan.
longer, more flowery, more respectful.
Elevated.
And thirdly, write a few more prayers.
Okay, but they're not writing prayers in a Bet Knesset.
Reciting,
So in what way,
Composing.
if composing would be great if that's what they were doing. Because the language of making something bigger would apply if you're composing new tefillot. But if you're not composing new tefillot, how do we have the word megadlin? So you offered that there's more people by virtue of the fact that it's magnified by the people that are actually praying. But there's something else here as well. And that is, if you look in the Torah, the language of prayer in the Torah is very scarce. It's very sparse. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora. That's all he says.
and Hail Narafan Allah.
We have El Narafan Allah if someone was saying Refuah Shlema in the synagogue that day.
He was saying it in the Bible.
So, right, but what I'm saying is, but it's not part of the Bet Knesset liturgy unless someone is saying Refuah Shlema. So what would Megadlim be? There's very few words in the Torah of prayer. We have the words of Abraham Avinu. We have words here and there, but not a huge amount.
Kaddish?
Not in the Torah.
No, I know it's not in the Torah. Someone could compose it.
You wouldn't be composing it though in the shul.
Somebody had some Ruach HaKodesh. and
Not in a synagogue. In other words, the reason why we're calling the synagogue Bayit Gadol is because in that place Tefillah is magnified. But why is it magnified? So again, we've offered a few different answers. What I'd like to suggest is similar to Torah. Since in the actual liturgy of prayer, there's very little in the Torah, right? So when a person comes to a Beit Knesset and they're reciting the words of the prayer, they're expanding on the body of Tefillah that existed previously. So the Beit Knesset was a place where they added to the corpus of Torah, of Tefillah, not because necessarily they were composing it at the moment, but because the mere recitation of prayer is to the prayers in the Torah what the expounding of Torah is to the Torah Shebichtav. Okay? Now,
How about
Now,
adding
yeah.
tunes? Does that make it holier or more expanded if you give it?
so it's interesting. The answer would be yes. The only thing is that then we would not have a synonymous explanation of the word gadol when it comes to a Beit Midrash and it comes to a Beit Knesset, which is okay. Why? Because we have two different opinions. So maybe they disagreed. We don't have to say that they said the same thing. It just fits nicely if they're saying exactly the same thing. One is just applying it to prayer, and one is applying it to Torah. Let's continue. The Gemara says, Man de Amar, the person that says Torah, why does he explain that it's Torah? Dichtiv, Hashem chafetz leman tzidko. God wants leman tzidko to do kindness, to do righteousness, or for the sake of righteousness to give to the Jewish people. Yagdil Torah v'yadir. He's going to increase Torah. So you see the word of Yagdil in the context of Torah. So Torah is made great. Make Torah great again applies to Torah. V'yadir, and it will become strengthened. Why? So therefore, Bayit Gadol could refer to a house of Torah. Manda ama tefillah, but the opinion that says tefillah, that it's referring to prayer, where do we see an example of Gedulah with regards to prayer, that you would call a house of prayer a big house? Because it says, Saprana hagedolot asher asa Elisha. Because the Pasuk says that he told him, please tell me the great things, the big things that Elisha did. What were the things that Elisha did? Elisha David, Berachameu David. What Elisha achieved, the miracles that he did through his prayer to God. So therefore, if the Pasuk says, tell me about the big things, the Gadol things that Elisha did, and those great things were achieved by acts of prayer, so you see that the word Gadol is a word that you would use when you're referring to prayer. And that's why it makes sense, by Gadol refers to that. The Gemara says, okay, so who says what? Tistayem de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi udama makom shegalim b'Torah Torah. Let's learn that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is the opinion. He's the one that said that Bait Gadol means makom shegalim b'Torah Torah. The Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Bet HaKnesset mutar lasoto Bet HaMidrash. Let's go back to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that we just saw earlier. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that you're allowed to turn a Bet Knesset into a Bet Midrash, indicating that of the two, which one is he holding on a higher pedestal? Bet Midrash. So it would make sense that he would be the one that would say Bait Gadol refers to a Bet Midrash. The Gemara continues, which would obviously by exclusion would mean that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says the other opinion. The Gemara continues, Aval machul Torah lo yikchu sfarim. So we learn the principle of ma'alim b'kodesh lo moridin, that you go up in holiness and not down. So now let's go back to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says, what if they sold a Torah. Remember the Mishnah went all the way from the Beit Knesset, all right, and some even say the town square. We went all the way through level by level by level until they reached the highest level, which is the Torah. Now the Gemara, the Mishnah reverses order and says, but if they sold the Torah, lo yikchu sfarim, they can't buy the 24 books. Now, the Mishnah therefore we have this apex, which is Torah, and then we kind of review all of it in the other direction.
Can they buy stone humashim?
For sure not.
Because they're not on cloth?
It's telling you that they couldn't even buy
Because it has the
a Torah. Forget the commentary for a minute. Let's say we have a Sefer Torah. I now want to buy any of the 24 books of the Torah.
Not good enough.
Not good enough, because none of
Can I
them.
buy a book of the 5 books of Moses?
No, I
it's not
can't.
on
I
par.
can't even buy a scroll of the 5 books of Moses.
Step down.
Everything's a step down.
You can only buy another Sefer Torah
Correct.
or go up.
But of which there isn't. Okay? So, the Mishnah says, if you sold the Torah, lo yikchu sfarim, you can't buy another other Sfarim. Ibaylahu. So what does that leave us? Exactly what we just said. Can I sell an old Torah to buy a new one? Right? It's the only thing that has, never mind more holiness, but at least the same. Do I say Ma'alim ba'kodesh lo moridin means I go up in holiness, but when I have not gone up, I've just stayed the same. That's not allowed. Or Dilma, or do I say Kivan deleka de aluye iluye acharina? Since there's nothing that actually is higher than a Torah, so there's nowhere to go from there. So what would I possibly do with that money? The Gemara says shapir dami, that I should be allowed to. Now, I found this very interesting. Can I share with you why? If I was analyzing this, how would I word the question of the Gemara? Do we say Ma'alim ba'kodesh lo moridi means you have to go up? Or do we mean, no, you just can't go down? That's how I would word the question.
What about a third possibility?
Wait. That's how I would word the question, right? So the Gemara now says, okay, what about another Sefer Torah? Do we say lo moridi means you just can't go down, but to stay the same is allowed? Or do we say, what's the other side of this?
Do we say you must go up unless it's in the case of Sefer Torah, in which case you can still do Sefer Torah? Because there is nothing higher.
Who said that?
Staying equal?
Who said that? See, again, this is what I want. Yeah. Nobody. So why is the Gemara already pitching me the second stage of this logic? First, answer the first question. When you say Ma'alim ba'kodesh or lo moridim, do you mean don't go down, but stay the same is okay? Or do you mean don't go down, but you must go up? The Gemara should first ask that question. After answering that question and saying, no, we hold that it means that you have to go up. If let's say that's what we mean, hold on one second. Decline. Zoom meeting, do you still have us? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, there was a phone call, so sometimes it shuts off the Zoom. Okay, so do we say, now if you're going to tell me that you must go up, now what do you do when there is no up to go? The Gemara effectively skipped a step. Are you with me on this? Yeah? Okay, what are you going to say?
I was asking the question, why not have a third formulation, which is you must go up. However, if you can't go up because you're already at the highest, then you may stay the same.
I agree. I'm just saying that that is a third option. What I'm asking is that, that is the suggestion of the Gemara.
Oh.
Kiva deleka iluya, since there's nothing higher, means, of course you have to go up. But in a case where there's nothing else, you could do it. Who said, maybe you have to go up, and when there's no other option, tough noogies.
But staying equal is not permitted either.
Sorry?
It says, since one doesn't heighten the level of sanctity, it's prohibited.
That's the first, in other words, the Gemara is giving you both. Step number one is, does it mean that you can't go down? Which would indicate that if it was the same or more, no problem. Or do we say, no, it means that you must go up. So in this case, you would not be allowed to. But maybe we'll say that if you can't go, if there's nowhere to go, so then you put the money into a Sefer Torah. I'm not sure why the Gemara the Gemara does not entertain that point in stages. First, give that point, and then say, okay, now what? And I'll tell you in a minute. Let's see the Gemara, how the Gemara answers. But I want to share with you why I think the Gemara felt it was okay to skip a step. So in other words, assuming you have to go up, the Gemara already is committed to the fact that going up in a scenario where there is no going up allows you to pick the second best option. Who said? Maybe not. Maybe you have to bury it. Okay? So the Gemara says as follows. Tashma, come close and listen. Oh, one other thing I would point out. When we ask the question to sell a Sefer Torah Yashan, we're not talking about Sefer Torah Shebala. We already experienced, we talked about a Sefer Torah that gets worn out, where it's pasul. What do you do with the Torah?
Use it for burial shrouds.
No, that's the cloth. Oh. What do you do with the Torah? You bury it with the Talmid Chacham.
Torah's scholar. That's
when it's pasul. Okay? Now over here, we cannot be talking about a case where it's pasul. You know why? Because if it was pasul, a kosher Torah is a higher level of Kedusha.
Right.
So the whole question doesn't begin.
And it's not worthy of selling.
Well, but again, you could ask, can I sell it in order to buy a new Torah? One might be able to say, okay, yes, you can. Right? But if it was a case where the Torah had already been pasul, then of course Gemara would not even have a question. We're talking just about a Sefer Torah Yashan. Now I'm trying to make sure that before it gets pasul, I've made that move to sell it and be able to get the maximum that I can for it. So the Gemara says as follows. Let's try and figure out whether or not the answer is no because it's not higher, or yes because there is no other option. Tashma, the Mishnah says, if you sell a Torah, you cannot buy books of the 24 books, which is not a Sefer Torah. Sfarim udelo. Sfarim, those books you're not allowed to buy. Ha-Torah, but Torah, b'Torah shapir dami. You're allowed to do it. So in other words, the Gemara is saying, by virtue of the fact that the Mishnah says that you cannot buy Sfarim, it leaves open the possibility of yes buying a Torah. So therefore, we would make a diuk from the Mishnah that you'd be allowed to sell an old Torah to buy a new Torah. By the way, you'd be able to make the same diuk, not even about an old Torah. Because the Mishnah never says selling an old Torah. It just says selling a Torah. So if this was a correct diuk, you could prove that I'm at all times allowed to sell one Torah to buy another Torah. The Gemara says, matnitin di'avad. No, we're not telling you what you should do or what you could do. We're talking about what you did do. Kika mebayela nechatechila. In other words, what does it mean that you did do? I sold the Torah for money. I have now cash money in my pocket. What can I buy with that money? So if you sold the Torah, don't buy Sefarim. But it's not telling you that you're allowed to sell a Torah to buy another Torah. Maybe that was also not allowed. Right? B'di'evet, now that I sold it, what should I do with the money? Buy another Torah. And that's a good diuk. But that doesn't tell me what I'm allowed to do in the first place. Kika mebayela, and my question was, lechatechila, do you have a proof with regards to the question that I was asking, which is lechatechila? Gemara answers, Tashma, golelin sefer Torah b'mitpachot chumashin. We roll up a sefer Torah in the wrappings of the chumashim, of the individual books. Now we already mentioned before that the Torah as a whole is holier than the Sefarim individual. So you're allowed to use the lower wrapping for the higher Kedusha. Because, what did you do with it? You went up. And the Chumashim are allowed to be used in the wrappings of the Nevi'im Ketuvim, the prophets and the writings which come after the Chumashim.
Can you read on Shabbat from a scroll that is only one Chumash?
For Torah, no. Not kosher.
Not kosher.
No.
And if you have nothing else in the synagogue?
Oh, you're allowed to read out of a printed Chumash. But it's not, you didn't read from a Torah. You could not make berachot on it.
No brachot.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes they do that. There's times when a community doesn't have a Torah, and what's it called? The Torah that they have is pasul until they get another one or whatever. So one of the things that they do is they read from a Chumash, But most communities, what they'll do is when they get the Torah, by the next week, they'll read 2 parashiyot, back to back, the one that they were not able to read in the Torah and the new one. But, says the Gemara on the Mishnah, "Aval lo nevi'im ketuvim mitpachot chumashim." But you can't use the wrapping of an individual chumash for the books of the Nevi'im Ketuvim, because that's going down. V'lo chumashim b'mitpachot sefer Torah. And you can't wrap chumashim in the wrapping of a sefer Torah. Again, the same point. Now, what did we learn from that? Katani mihat, what did we learn? Golelin sefer Torah b'mitpachot chumashim. At the very least, we learned that you could wrap up a Torah with the wrappings of a single chumash. Mitpachot chumashin in, you're allowed to use the wrapping of chumashim to wrap a sefer Torah. Mitpachot sefer Torah, lo. But you cannot take the wrapping of one Torah and use it to wrap another Torah. So, since that's true,
Can't go from one kosher Torah to another kosher Torah?
the Gemara is making that diuk from the Mishnah. Since the Mishnah says you're allowed a chumash to a Torah, and it doesn't say you're allowed a Torah to a Torah, therefore the Gemara's diuk is that the Mishnah would be saying that you could not use the wrapping of one Torah for another Torah.
Would that then argue against...
In which case, wait, hold on.
Torah?
In which case we prove that you could not sell a Torah for another Torah.
You
Because,
have to bury it.
yeah, now again, it's very hard to understand what the Gemara is saying over here. Let me just explain why. The sanctity of a Sefer Torah, what is the sanctity of the Torah? What is its Kedusha? The fact that it is a complete and kosher Sefer Torah. Which should tell you that by definition, this Torah is no holier than any other Torah. Because they draw their name, their holiness status, from the fact that they meet a certain set of criteria. How could you say that you can't take the mitpachot of one Torah and wrap another Torah as a diuk from the Mishnah? How would one be able to see that? What would the logic be?
The wrapping of the Torah is serving a lesser function, so it's
Why is it serving a lesser function?
because you can no longer read from it. It's used to wrap another Torah. So
No. What I mean is, let's say this is one Torah and there's another Torah.
Right.
If this has a wrapping,
Yes.
you can't use this wrapping for that to wrap that.
Oh, right.
They're equal. Why not? The proof is, what do you see? That we don't consider going from one Torah to another Torah the same level. Because if it was the same level, then you'd be allowed to. Or if we held that you were allowed to do something for the same level, same point, okay? That logic makes much more sense to me. What the Gemara is not saying is that one Torah is holier than the other. What the Mishnah is inferring is that since they carry the same holiness, and we hold that the same is not good enough, you have to go up, therefore, it's no good. And in our scenario, where there was nothing holier, where there was nothing better, so there, we tell you once, if you sold the scroll, you could purchase another Sefer Torah. But, lichatechila, would you be allowed to do that? Maybe not, because you're not upping the Kedusha, so therefore you have no right to do so. Same thing with the wrapping of one Torah to the other. Gemara says, no, that's not a good diuk from the Mishnah. Why? Let's look at the end of the Mishnah. You can't take chumashim and use the wrapping of a Sefer Torah. Ha Torah b'Torah, shapir dami. But you would be allowed from one Torah to the next. Now let's just be clear. What did the Mishnah just do? The Mishnah took advantage of the fact that the point is stated in the positive and in the negative in the Mishnah. So first we said, it says over here that you can't wrap a chumash with the wrapping of a Torah. What does that mean? But you could wrap a Torah with another Torah. The Gemara says that's not a proof. Because look in the other part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you could wrap a Torah with the wrapping of a chumash, but you can't, right? You can't do that, but you could use the wrapping of another Torah for a Torah. Do you understand? So the same way you proved that you can't do it from the positive statement of the Mishnah, I'm going to prove that you can't do it from the negative statement of the Mishnah. In which case, the logic, the diuk cancels each other out, and we have no proof from the Mishnah. From this braita that we just mentioned, you can't prove anything with regards to this question. So, how are we going to answer this question? Are you allowed to sell an old Torah to buy a new one? Tashma, manichin sefer Torah al gabe Torah. You're allowed to put one Torah on top of another Torah. V'Torah al gabe chumashim. And Torah on top of other chumashim. Obviously, second one, because Torah is higher than other chumashim. V'chumashim al gabe nevim ketuvim. Also obvious. Aval lo nevim ketuvim al gabe chumashim. Not nach on a chumash. V'lo chumashin al gabe Torah. Not a individual sefer of the Torah on top of the whole Torah. Because, what do you see? Because that is higher kedusha than this. But here the Mishnah, the Braita explicitly said, and you can put one Torah on top of another Torah, indicating that in between one sefer and the next, we're not going to consider this an impediment because of the lack of going up. So therefore, if I have an old Torah and you're trying to sell me the logic that I can't buy another Torah because that's not higher, so we'll learn from here that you're able to buy another Torah because you see the Torah did not state that you can't put the Torah on top of the other Torah because it's not higher. Okay? Gemara says, no. Hanacha ka'amret. You're trying to prove to me the purchase of a new Torah by selling an old Torah from putting one thing on top of another. Why? What's the difference between them? Shani hanacha de lo efshar. Why did you put one Torah on top of another Torah? Because you had no place. You ever see sometimes they have the Sefer Torah on the bima. There's nowhere to put anything. So they'll take one Torah, like if it's Ashkenaz, and they'll put it on the other one for a minute while they're rearranging. Are you allowed to do so or not? The Mishnah, the Braita just told us that you're allowed to do it. The Gemara basically is using the same question he asked before. When you don't have a choice, you could put one on top, a Torah on top of another Torah. But does that mean that you have carte blanche to go putting Torahs on other Torahs whenever you want? I.e. really saying, does that mean that you have the right to sell in the first place an old Torah to buy a new Torah? You have no proof, because there it is efshar. You could not sell the old one and go buy a new one with other money. The Gemara says, if that's not what this Mishnah means, in other words, where you don't have a choice, michrach hechi karchinan. How are we allowed to roll up a Torah? By definition, when you're rolling the Torah, what are you doing? You're putting Torah on top of Torah, right? V'hakayativ dapa achavre. One page is on top of another. Elakivan de lo efshar shari. But since it's not possible to get around that, you're allowed to do it. Achanami kivan de lo efshar shari. Also over here, since it's not possible, it's mutar. But in a scenario where you have an option of not selling the Torah in the first place, you would not be able to rely on it. Tashma, the Gemara says, let's learn. Damar Rabba Bar Hana, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabba Bar Hana said the name Rabbi Yochanan, the name Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Lo yimkor adam sefer Torah yashan, l'kapo chadash. Explicitly, Rabba Bar Hana said in the name of Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, you're not allowed to sell an old Torah to buy a new one. Straightforward, no diukim. Gemara says, no. Hatam mishum pshiuta. In that case, we're talking about a scenario where they didn't do it in the first place. It was a scenario that we said no because they were honest. They made a mistake. Since you sold a new Torah, and then you're going to go buy the old Torah. Now you're going to go buy a new Torah, but there's a space between those two sales. Maybe something will happen, and you won't buy a new Torah with the old money. So therefore, the reason why he said you're not allowed to do it is because he was worried, like we found with the bricks of the old shul being used to build a new shul. We're worried that you're not going to do it. Kikamrin, and what am I talking about? We're talking about, and over here, the Torah is already written. It's ready for you to take it. All you need to do is give me the money for the new one. So if I pay for the old one and immediately take ownership of the new one, in such a case, what would be the halacha? So therefore, I basically pushed off the proof of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel because I set it up in a case where there's a space between the selling of the old and the buying of the new. Do we have a proof then that is ironclad. The Gemara says, Tashma, let's listen. Yochanan says the name Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir. And Mochrin Sefer Torah. A person is not allowed to sell Torah. Elmod Torah v'lisa isha. Only in order to study Torah and to get married. Interestingly enough, what Nathan said earlier is that when a person studies Torah, effectively, they are a higher form of Torah than the scroll when they're properly studying Torah. Right? So therefore, if you sold the Sefer Torah and you financed a person studying Torah, that is a Ma'alin Bakodesh, that you'd be allowed to do it. So what about Lisa Isha, to marry a woman? Is that better than a Sefer Torah? How is that allowed? Shema Minah, the Gemara says, whether or not we understand the wife part, Shema Minah, we learn from here, Torah b'Torah, Shapir Dami. A Torah for a Torah is allowed. Why? How do you know this? En mochrin Torah, ela, you're not allowed to sell it, only to learn Torah. Why? How do we know that a person would be allowed to purchase a Torah with it? Because the Gemara held that the Torah and the Torah scholar, which represent the Torah, are the same thing. Okay? Again, I'm not sure what the proof is, because as we've said earlier, a Sefer Torah, a living Sefer Torah, is even more holy than one that is just written. So I don't know why the Gemara would find that to be a good proof, but however, the Gemara wanted to bring that as a proof that you'd be allowed to sell one Torah for another. The Gemara says, Dilma, shani limud, shalimud demaseh. Maybe that's different. You're allowed to sell Torah to finance the guy to study Torah, because not only is he going to learn Torah, what is he going to do? He's going to do the mitzvot, or he'll disseminate it. So there's even more in the man than there is in the scroll. The Gemara says, Isha Nami, also with regards to marrying a wife, the Pasuk says, Lo tohu bera'ah, l'shevet yitzara. God did not make this world to be void, to disappear by lack of procreation. Rather, l'shevet yitzara. He created it in order to have people populating the earth. So therefore, the Gemara says, since these two things are superior level mitzvot, one because it's Torah plus, the other because the Pasuk considers it a reason for the entire creation. Lo letohu bera'ah, the shevet yitzara. It considers it such a great mitzvah that it is the purpose of all of creation. If that's the case, you'd be allowed to sell a Torah for those two things. Aval Torah b'Torah, lo, but maybe Torah v'Torah, Torah for one, Torah for another, maybe it would not be the case. So we still don't have a proof.
It would be bizayon to the first Torah.
What do you mean?
It would be embarrassing to the first Torah to sell him to buy a second one.
You're giving me a logic as to why that's the case.
Why it wouldn't be allowed?
Why Torah b'Torah is asur? We have multiple levels of logic for that. One is the embarrassment of the Torah, but then maybe that's offset by the kavod to the new Torah. We have another reason for that is ma'alim bakodesh. What we seem to be operating with is this internal struggle that the Gemara has in understanding. Does ma'alim bakodesh lo merdi mean you can't go down, but you could stay the same? Or does ma'alim bakodesh mean you could only go up?
Could you say, and is it the argument here, the reason you can't go from Torah to Torah, because you have to only go up, and the two ways of going up are giving the money to a Torah scholar or helping him marry a wife?
That is what the Mishnah just said.
That's the argument for why you can't exchange Torah for Torah.
No, the Mishnah, the Mishnah said that. The Gemara said, "Oh, you see, that's a proof that you could sell Torah for Torah because basically a Talmid Chacham is the same as a Torah." That was the Gemara's proof that you could. Answers the Gemara, how do you know? Maybe it's not the same because he's Torah plus.
Right.
Yeah. So the Gemara says we left it as a maybe, and you can't prove anything from a maybe. Okay, the Gemara says last bit before we retire. The Gemara says for the evening, not forever. The Gemara says Tanu Rabbanan. We learned Lo yimkor adam sefer Torah. Person should not sell sefer Torah. Afal pi she'eno tzarich lo. Even if you don't need it anymore, even if you have 10 of them. Yeter al ken, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. More than that, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Afilu en lo ma yochal. Even if he doesn't have food to eat, but he has an extra Sefer Torah. So no, it's not that he has one Torah, but he has no food. The guy has 10 Torahs and no food. He can't sell the Torah, and then in order to do it, he should go and beg, borrow, or plead for some food rather than sell Torah. Umachar Sefer Torah. When a person sells a Sefer Torah, or bito, or if he sells his daughter, what's the case? The case in the Gemara says that in the times of the Torah, a person was able to be mekadesh his daughter to someone else, having to really understand that in the context of the time, it was the most important thing was to make sure that your daughter was together with a man, because otherwise she was exposed to rape, she was exposed to being taken advantage of, she didn't have necessarily enough food. Having someone who was obligated to make sure that she was fed and clothed and taken care of was a primary objective of parents. So therefore, says the Gemara, what if a person is in a situation where he sells a Torah or he sells his own daughter as a maidservant, which ultimately becomes the person's wife? Just to be clear, we don't have a right to sell your daughter randomly as a servant to someone. The point was just
Be a minor.
Yes, but it was what you were doing was you were giving her to him. She would learn the ways of his home, and then she would become his wife. And if he did not choose to marry her when she became of age, which was the age of an adult, then she would leave, and he would have to give her gifts, etc., etc. So the Mishnah says, if a person sold the Torah, or if he sold his daughter to marry someone, but he did it because he needed some food, he never sees any signs of blessing from that, even though it was done in a legal manner, and even if you actually did sell the money and you made a fortune of money in the sale, that money is cursed, in other words, and it will never bring you any beracha. So therefore, we tell you not to sell the Sefer Torah. So you see how strict we were with the idea of selling the Sefer Torah, probably because of what Nathan said before, because it's a tremendous bizayon, an embarrassment to the Torah that it's being sold as we don't have a proof yet. We don't have a proof about vis-a-vis the second. But when a person sells, even for such a great need, still the Torah says you're not allowed to, because if it was okay, then there wouldn't be a siman kilala on the object.
What if the next town doesn't have?
Rabbi, was that what they wrote in the back of the Codex? Or remember in the beginning of the Codex when we read when we went to studies and it said whoever sells this would be cursed?
That is an excellent memory, by the way, that you have right there. Because that is what it says over there, but that's not something that was generally used in every scenario. That was specifically, I think, put there because the amount of work that went into creating it to be used as a resource to correct other books. So they felt that the sale of that object was criminal. But you don't find necessarily that that's inscribed in Bibles. In Sefrei Torah. So, but definitely I think that the makor, the source for that idea, that you could say that a person is cursed for selling it, could be understood to be this Gemara of Ena Ro'eh Siman Yibaracha Leolam. Except the only thing I would say, Jonah, is that over here it says that you don't see Siman Beracha from that money. In the Codex, it went much further in the curse. So in other words, over here it's just saying that money, you're going to lose it somehow. It's not going to...
Ruach HaKodesh, that it was going to get split up and then people would sell different pages of it and whatever. And in an attempt to keep it whole, they had to put a really strong curse on it so that whoever
It's possible.
wrote that had the Ruach HaKodesh that it might get split up later, centuries later.
It's possible. I don't think that book was actually ever split up. The other one was. The Codex of Aleppo got split up, not by bandits or pirates, but in the aftermath of this pogrom where the synagogues were attacked, people grabbed whatever books, there was a fire, they hid it. Someone told me recently that in his family, his grandfather had one page from the Codex, but it was like a family secret. And any time he had like a court case or there was something really important, he would take the folded up paper with him in his pocket as a sign of protection and beracha. That wild. I told him, well, now that he's passed away, maybe you could return it. It doesn't belong to you. All right. Tov, b'seder. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.